these are the welts for the welt pocket, and the instructions that follow will show us how to make this. But let me show you a little something here. This is the face, but when you turn it over, if you really look carefully, there is a seam here, and it's hidden by the fabric, but you can see, there it is. There is a seam here. So there's not a seam on this end and not a seam on this end. The beauty of this particular construction is that you have 3 folded edges and no additional thickness here and here. To achieve this, it first starts with the pattern. And that's what we'll start with, drafting the pattern for the welt. Before we make the welt pocket, though, we need to make the pattern. I like to show this because it's useful to know how to make the pattern for any shape of welt. This is, I think it's called a quadrilateral or a quadrangle. It's 4-sided. This is the welt guide that we're going to be using. You can see this points up. This line is what will sew the welt into the body of the garment. And you can see there's the grain line. So what I have done is I have copied this on fresh paper. So I have the up direction, I have the grain line here. And so now we're going to make the pattern. A little explanation. When you have one of these patterns, generally there's a fold here and then a seam on this end and on this end. That's all well and good, but I think that it's a little too thick on the ends. So I'm going to show you how to pivot these end seams to the back. So as you can see, I have copied this on fresh paper, and let me just label this. This is the face or the front. The other side is going to be the back. So our first step is to fold the paper on this fold line. So that's a fold here. And then we want to cut this out . And with some tape these ends closed. One end taped closed, the other end taped closed. And we can just get rid of that there. Okay. So this is the front. This would be the back. So what we want to do is we're going to pivot these ends. We're going to create a seam here and here. So this is like a little handbag. The easiest way to figure out how to place your seam, you're just going to fold. That fold will be a line. And then this fold will be a line. So when you're making this pattern, the thing to know is that the lines start at the cut edge and go towards the corners. So now from here, I'm just going to label, this is for navigation. These two are points A, that's going to be B at the corner, and then C and D. So these I will use to navigate through the construction. At this point, you want to cut one layer. I know it seems obvious, but I've had people cut both. So we cut from C to D and from A to B. So when we lay this out flat, here is the pattern. That's what the pattern looks like. And just to have the lines, I'm going to draw a line there and a line here. So there we are. That is the pattern. We're not going to add seam allowances. We're going to do that in the construction of the garment. So here's the pattern. Next, cutting out the materials. First, we mark the silk organza. Now notice I'm laying the organza on top of the pattern. It's much easier. Then I'll pin it in a few places. Now, the fold should be parallel with either the lengthwise grain or the crosswise grain. The silk organza doesn't have to be on the same grain as the main body. The main body grain line, that's really just for the fashion fabric itself, not for the understructure. So now, what I will do, and this is one of those times you can use a Sharpie, it's allowed. Some people clutch their pearls and see that I'm using a Sharpie, but it's considered legitimate. We want to transfer all of this information onto the organza. So here I have all of the information transferred to the organza. What I will do next, off camera, is to flip the pattern over to get the piece for the opposite side. And I will bring that back once I'm finished. So here I have both pocket pieces. We have mirror images here. So then the next step is going to be taking the pattern piece and folding it closed, because we're going to be using this to cut the interfacing. There we go, better. This we'll use to cut our canvas, so I will go get some canvas and bring it back here. Here is a scrap of our canvas, and I'm going to put this long line, this is the fold line, on the lengthwise grain. And this is cut double, so you can cut both at the same time. And really, so there we are. And finally, what I like to do, since we're going to have a fold on this edge, and this edge, I want to shave off 1/8 of an inch on that fold there. along the top edge. You want this canvas to be slightly smaller than the welt so that it doesn't create a bind inside of the welt at the end. And then here. So now we have two mirror images. Next, we apply this to the organza. I've worked ahead and pinned one of the pieces of the canvas down. So really what you're doing here is you want to line the lower edge up with this lower edge here, and you want to make it so that this is centered all the way around. You'll see about 1/8 of an inch outside these cut edges of the canvas, and that's as it should be. So what I will do is I will go over to the machine and sew through the canvas and the organza with a serpentine stitch. You could use a zigzag stitch, but we're just going to sew this together. No mystery there, so I will bring back the finished product. So here, this is what we have. This is just a serpentine stitch. You could use a zigzag, or if you don't have a zigzag stitch, you could just sew with 2 rows of straight stitching. This is just holding the canvas to the organza. This will be the side that goes against the face fabric, but we'll cover that in a moment. Now that we have the 2 welt unit support structures, next we go to the coat itself. Before I begin, what I like to do is to use a stay tape. You could use seams grate, you could use any other kind of fusible stay tape to stay the armhole, the neck, and the front edge of the jacket front. You can see here we have our tailor tacks, we have our center fronts. So this is preparation that you want to do before you address the working with the fronts, so that you don't end up distorting anything. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this away and move this in. So what I've done here to kind of explain, you can see that this fabric has sort of a subtle vertical stripe. I'll zoom in just for a moment. The horizontal stripe isn't that pronounced. It's really the vertical that I'm concerned about. So what I want to do when I install the welt, I want the grain of the welt to match the grain of the fabric. So what I've done here, this is just a thread tracing up one of the stripes so I can see what I'm doing. And I also made a line of thread between this tailor tack and this tailor tack. Now in my example, maybe in yours too, the pocket welt ends up a little shorter than this, so you align it with the top tailor tack. Now here we are. So here is this. Now the canvas is underneath because the face fabric is going to be on top. But what I want to do is I want to see where the placement of that line is. So if you're wanting to match a pattern or a stripe, this is really the way to do it. And that's one of the advantages of using the organza, is you can draw the stripe on the organza so that when you lay it out onto the fabric, you can get a good match. So what I'm going to do here, there we are, that is going to be the line for the stripe. I will do this on the other side as well, but I'm going to work with this half for this particular example. So once we have this, and we have the other one marked, we're going to go to the fabric to get the fabric onto the welts. So, to refresh, this line here equals this line here. So now what we want to do, put this aside, I have another piece of fabric, and we want to pick out a line on this that we transfer to the back. So I'm going to put a pin right there so you can see there is a line going up. So to begin, I'm going to anchor the thread here. So then the object here is long stitches underneath, short stitches on top, because we want this. We want to see this grain line from the back. Because again, we want the grain line of the welt on the face fabric to match the fronts. So the short stitch here, I'll show you what it produces here. It produces a longer stitch on the back that we can see. So I will go off camera and finish this and bring it back and show you the result. So here you can see I have a lengthwise grain and a crosswise grain marked. Because it does have a subtle little bit of crosswise grain, what I've done here on the organza, I compared it to the face fabric, and that is where a crosswise grain will hit. So what I will do here is I will line up, there we are, line up the lengthwise grain and crosswise grain. So I've lined up this, and we can just pin here and here. So we've lined up lengthwise grain, crosswise grain, so that when this shows on the body, it will be correct. Next, we're going to sew the organza to the face fabric. Our next step is to sew outside these lines. Don't sew on this side of the line, sew outside. See, these are the lines where the welt will fold. We want the stitches to land on the inside. So this is a single thread, and it really is just a tiny little stitch. I'm using a contrasting thread, obviously, for demonstration purposes, but if you sew it correctly, it really won't show. Show you this here. As you can see, like I said, outside that line. Almost done. Secure the thread. And I'm just going to pin that there, pin that there. So when I turn this over, first off, I'll show you. This is what it should look like on the back, and now notice you don't have any real show through on the front. So those stitches just barely catch the fabric. You just want to hang the canvas by the organza. Now next we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew a machine stitch across the bottom so all four sides of this quadrangle are anchored. So here we're just going to sew on that line. Standard stitch. Just to anchor. Just want to anchor it down like so. And there we have it. So that is what we just sewed. So now we take this back to the work table and we're going to pin the ends. Now this is where the letters come in. I've remarked the letters on this one. So we're going to match point A to point A and we're going to sew from A to B. What that looks like. Put the pin in A, fold right sides together, and bring the pin out on point A. So we have it in on point A, out on point A. And we pin, then we pin baste from A to B. So we just want to make sure that those two lines are pinned to each other. Now I will go over to the machine. I'm going to start at A, back tack, and sew down to B and back tack, and I'll bring it back and show you the result. As you can see here, started at A, stitch down to B, and back tack. So from here, we want point C with point C. Just match these two, make sure they're nice and smooth. So point C with point C, point C, and then we pin baste between C and D. And again, start the stitching at C, back tack, sew down to D, and back tack. So I will bring back the results. So here we have sewn from C to D. Now, we're going to trim the seam allowances to 1/4 of an inch, and then just take that off to get rid of it. 1/4 of an inch. Now here, make a clip 90 degrees to the stitching line right at the end, and clip that corner. We'll do the same thing, A to B, trim the seam allowance to 1/4 of an inch, and then get rid of the rest of this. And that's a little oopsie right there. That's not going to kill you. And here. So, to give you an idea, a little preview of where this is going, see, that is how the seams will go on the back. Next, pressing. First, we press the seams as sewn, and then on the point presser, I'm going to open up the seams. Okay, now, something to see here. So you have these two 90-degree cut edges. You're going to overlap the two fabrics. And by overlapping them, later on we'll reduce the bulk, but that's just going to make your life easier. So then here, same thing. You want to press the seam open. And these two overlap as well. Now let me give you a good view of this. Okay. See how, there we are. See how this seam allowance goes that way and this one goes over that way. We're going to reduce the bulk later, but I just wanted to show you that up close. Next, we turn everything right side out. So I've turned everything right side out. So now we want that to sit under there and this to sit over. And same here, we want that seam allowance to go that way and that to sit over. And now, this is face down, we are going to press and there we are. And finally, to close the welt, where is it? There we are. There's your machine stitch that we sewed earlier. I'm going to sew through all the layers on that stitch again, and then I will meet you back at the work table. So here we are. You can see there's the machine stitching, and you can see we've sewn through all the layers. Now you can get rid of the basting. It has served its purpose, and we're done. So here is our welt. The next stop is going to be top stitching. If you choose to use top stitching, which I'm choosing to do, this is the time to do it. So as you can see here, I have chosen ribbon floss in a chain stitch for the collar and the cuff latches. So it stands that I would choose the same ribbon floss for the two pocket welts. Next, we're going to prepare the pocket welt to add to the pocket bag. Before we add the welt to the pocket, we need to trim this seam allowance down to 3/8 of an inch. And it's easy to do. This 3/8 of an inch is going to come in handy later. So there we have the two welts. Next, the pockets. Here is the pocket bag with the welt attached. This is face side up, and the welt, as you can see, is sewn to the pocket, face side up. So now, let me talk about what happens here and how we get there. This is the pocket bag, face side up, and you can see I pressed a crease. And really how you do that is you just line all the edges up, press that crease, open it up face side up. So from here, this is the welt, cut edge stitching line. We will line up the cut edge and center it on the pocket. So again, cut edge is on the crease, and pin it down in a couple of places. And this is where I like to check myself before I go any further to make sure that I have one for each side. You just want to look and make sure that this one faces this way and this one faces this way. I get dyslexic, so I have to check these things. So we will take this over to the sewing machine and sew the welt to the pocket. I'll meet you at the machine. So here is the stitching. What we want to do with the needle is we want to lower the needle and see how the needle bumps up against the edge of the welt right on that stitching line. That is what you're looking for. Because to start this, we're going to start with an extremely short stitch, a 0.5. And we want the beginning and the end of the stitching to be right at the edge of the welt, no further out. Now, we're going to stitch for about 3/8 of an inch, then lengthen the stitch to 2.5, just the standard default length. And you're going to sew again right on that stitching line till about 3/4 of an inch from the end. And then again, I want you to watch this. Shorten that stitch to 0.5. So you're going to sew till the first time that needle falls off the edge. It's better to be a little too short here rather than a little too long, because if it's a little too long, when you install the pocket, you're going to have a gap at each end. So there. You can see. And now we will go back to the work table. We have one final step before we install these pockets into the jacket. And you can see here, there's the stitching line. We want to, now you don't cut through the pocket bag, but you want to cut a steep angle here and another steep angle here. Now there is about a 1/16 of an inch, or about 1.5 millimeters between the short stitches and the edge of the fabric. So now I'm going to pull out here a little bit, because what you're creating, if you look at the shape of that seam allowance, you know, the stitching line from here down to here and up, this cut edge is going to be your stitching guide in the next step when we install these into the coat. So what we've done here, we have prepared the pocket welts and the pocket bags, in our next lesson we're going to install the pockets into the coat.